Hello, everyone. This is Darcinovia here, and this is my stream, finally, on Light of the Jedi, one of the newest books in the new canon. There's others that are coming, and probably by the time you're watching this, you know, the third book of the High Republic will already be out. So if it comes out as out of date, that's why. Light of the Jedi. What is this book exactly? For those of you who are living under a rock, it's the first of many, books and comics to come in the High Republic era. The High Republic is the first new, era that Disney has done with Star Wars. Let's be real. The sequel trilogy, it's just, you know, the original trilogy era 2.0. It's not really anything new. And with this being the first, big, event when it comes to stuff outside the Star Wars films I would say since Vector Prime. How does this book hold up? Does this book live up to the Old Republic era? Does this book, live up to the New Jedi Order? At least Vector Prime, because that's all I'm going to compare it to. The answer is no. For obviously no. Obviously not. Why? Well, let's be real. A lot of the expanded universe content is not going to compare to what came before it. And I think comparing everything to the EU is just, you're setting yourself up for failure. So the best thing we could do is judge the High Republic on its own merit. Light of the Jedi being the first of many novels to come. How does this book live up to its predecessors? Now, I'm going to get the positives out of the way because, I don't think everything about this book, is good or bad. I'll give you my final thoughts about the book when I get later into this podcast. So I'm going to be talking about the positives first. Obviously, for any self-respecting, reviewer, they're going to talk about the good stuff before they talk about the bad stuff. Now, the positives, I will give for Light of the Jedi. It does a great job at world building. World building is important if you're building a universe. World building is important if you're trying to expand this universe that, exists. And if you're going to do a new era, that takes place 200 years before the prequels, world building is essential. Good world building, because that's one thing the new canon has been lacking ever since, it started. It is the world building, is the weakest aspect of the new canon. It's one thing that the new canon has been lacking since, it started. Yes, there is world building, but most of the world building is just compensating for stuff that the new films won't do themselves. The new novels take the bulk of the world building, and basically they're the reason why the new canon isn't a barren wasteland in terms of lore. They're not being used to actually enhance the universe. They're being used as a band-aid for every problem that the new movies have. So, Light of the Jedi not being tied to any of the films, because there is no movie in this era, there's no show in this era, it succeeds or fails on its own. And I do think the world building aspect is the best part of this novel, honestly. What the Jedi were like during this era, what the Republic, how they managed to deal with crisis if they didn't have a military, that is, explained here. And the world building in this book also, spoilers, hints at conflicts that happened long before the High Republic, such as an Old Republic era is going to happen at some point, and I feel like they're building up to that with this book. Even though there's 2 hints in this novel alone about conflicts that have happened in the past, I do feel like, this book does an exceptional job at world building. Though it could be a detriment to some extent, because this book introduces a lot of new characters, and the world building aspect is more interesting than the characters themselves. Which, speaking of the characters, I do think the new characters they introduce in this book are interesting. A lot of them are. And I don't think, I could say anything bad about them. Well, I do think the side characters that aren't, the Jedi are, for the most part, not that interesting, considering they feel like they're just taking up space, in my opinion. And I think, when I'm reading about those characters, I was like, come on, focus on the Jedi already. Because, the new canon has been dry of Jedi content since it started. And this is the first, of, you know, many stories in this era to focus on Jedi, which is a good thing. Now, if you're a Sith fan, you're going to have to wait a lot longer for that. But I will give credit where credit's due. At least the characters are interesting. The new Jedi, their philosophy on the Force, they're all unique. Not one Jedi looks at the Force the same way. And that's what makes, the Jedi in this era interesting. They're not like the Jedi of the prequels. And of course, you would expect Jedi of different eras to look at the Force differently because, again, cultures evolve and cultures, do not stay the same, throughout, their entire existence. And if anyone complains about the Jedi not being true to what was established in The Phantom Menace and A New Hope, obviously have never paid attention to the movies themselves. This is a era of Jedi before they lost their way. And I think, characters like Alvar Chris is interesting. And I know a lot of people think Alvar Chris is a Mary Sue, which I don't see any indication that she's a Mary Sue. I mean, in part one, she needed help, saving, Hazel Prime from destruction, and she could not have done that alone. She needed the help of many Jedi in the system and even throughout other parts of the galaxy. And I think the idea that she's a Mary Sue is absurd. I mean, comparing Avar Kriss to Rey is ridiculous. I do think she's a great character, what little we've seen from her, and I'm looking forward to reading more. In fact, I like them to explore her past one of these days, which I do think they're going to, as the era develops more. Now, the villains, the Nihil. There's some people that don't like these villains. There's some people that like them. I think they're pretty cool in concept. I think they have cool looking designs. I do like their aesthetic. Though I don't know how you could carry these villains throughout this entire era. I do question how are they going to have a group of outlaws who are essentially space libertarians, let's just be real. How are they going to have these villains go on for an extended period of time? I feel like, I don't think you could carry all three phases with the Nihil. I think the Nihil are going to be the villains of phase one of this era. And I don't think you could carry them on past that because I don't know how you could carry them on. And as cool as they are, I don't want to see them, past phase one because I don't think you could actually utilize them for that long. Because yes, they are a threat to the Republic because of the hyperspace lanes, but I just don't think you could keep these villains going for this long. Then again, I could be proven wrong. I like their aesthetic. I think they're cool characters, and I like to see more of them. I do like the Nihil. Honestly, I think they're a breath of fresh air from what we've been getting from Canon. Now, I'm just looking. Now, that's as far as the pros are concerned. I don't think this is a bad book, but I do think the praises are overblown. But I already said for the cons, like majority of the good guys that aren't the Jedi are not interesting, so I don't think I need to elaborate on that more. Honestly, part one, which is the start of this book, is, to me, it's too fucking long. I think part one could have been shorter. I think having over over 100 pages of The Great Disaster. It's too long. I think the pacing is atrocious for the first part of Light of the Jedi. And I don't think there's people that would disagree with that, honestly. I think part 1 to me is too long. You could have made the part 1 50 pages because it's way too goddamn long in my opinion. But then again, I did bring up earlier in this video about the world building. Most of this portion of the book is world building. And that could be a detriment for this particular part of the book, considering The Great Disaster, to me, I don't think should have been as long as it was. But that's just my opinion. I don't think it's a bad part of the book. It is necessary to set up the rest of this era. But I feel like this could have been much shorter. I do think part 2 was solid. The pacing was great. We learned more about the Jedi of this era in this portion. And it's basically, a mystery, novel at this point. Like who caused the Great Disaster? It is revealed towards the end of the novel on who caused it. But I do feel like, this portion of the novel was the best. And for me, when I was reading it, I couldn't put it down in this portion. Unlike part 1, where I had to slog my way through it because it was too damn long and I just wanted to read this part and get it over with. This part of the novel, we get more, insight into the Nihil. I think that's what they're called. I'm just going to call them that because that's what they call them in the audiobook. And in this portion, we also learn, what the Starlight Beacon is going to be. The Chancellor that's introduced in this book, I think she's an interesting character. I'm looking forward to reading more about her. Like one of the only characters that aren't the Jedi that are interesting. Again, I think this is a good part of the book, and I don't think it's, that bad, but like I said, part 1 does drag the book down a bit. And another criticism I do have of the novel, and I will get to the writing portion in a bit, is part 3, the last part of the book. It feels completely rushed. It feels like, once you get to part 3, everything falls into place so quickly. And not to mention, everything, that is built up from part 1 just suddenly, comes, and it feels like it just ends when part 3 starts. Part 3 should have been longer than it was, because I was disappointed. Part 3 seemed like it could have been much better than it was, and I think that's the issue. Part 1 should have been shorter, and part 3 should have been longer. And I don't know if Charles Scholl was on a strict writing schedule, but I feel like he could have done a better job, concluding the first part of what's going to be a multi-book series. And don't get me wrong, I don't think this is bad, but part 3 should have been longer than it was, because everything just ends too quickly, and not to mention too conveniently. Yes, there's a cliffhanger at the end of this book, and you're going to have to wait for the next book in the series to find out what happens next. But I feel like part 3 should have been longer, because it feels like, they got everything they wanted to establish in the first 2 parts, and he just wanted to end part 3 just so they could get on to the next book. Part 3 could have been so much better. Now, my biggest criticism of Light of the Jedi, and this is not a criticism that's unique to me, is the writing style. Light of the Jedi is not badly written. If Light of the Jedi were a young adult novel, I would be okay with the way it's written. But as someone that's 32 years old as of this recording, I expect something to resemble more of an adult novel. I expect something for an adult, not something for, a teenager. And this is my biggest criticism of the new canon. And I'm not going to, relent on these criticism. A lot of the books in the new canon read like young adult novels. Lie of the Jedi, if it were a young adult novel, it would be fine with the way it's written. But as an adult novel, it doesn't. Okay, if you compare it to the likes of Claudia Gray, Timothy Zahn, James Luceno, and I'm going by people who have written for the new canon, mind you, and then compare them, to this, Charles Scholl. Charles Scholl comes off as being very weak in his writing, or Alexander Freed. It's like they should have, gotten, if they were going to get somebody else, they should have gotten Claudia Gray to start this era, not Charles Scholl. And I stand by Charles Scholl. Should have never have written this novel to begin with. I know he had a lot riding on his shoulders starting a brand new era, but that's not an excuse for the young adult writing style. The young adult writing style to me is a problem. And honestly, when you have the likes of Zahn, Alexander Freed, John Jackson Miller, James Luceno, Claudia Gray, Christy Golden, and a few others writing for Star Wars, hell, even Aladdin Foster, and Jason Fry, come on. Seriously, come on. You have more qualified writers than Charles Scholl, and they chose Charles Scholl to write Light of the Jedi. Charles Scholl should not be writing adult fiction. He should be writing young adult. If this is the best we could expect from him, I hope he doesn't write any more, any more High Republic era novels. Because Charles Scholl, his writing just isn't good enough for adult fiction. Don't get me wrong. There are good young adult novels in Star Wars, both Legends and Canon. But the difference between those writers and him is their books don't feel like young adult novels in terms of how they're written. They feel like something that could fit comfortably in the adult section, like A.R.K. Erickson, I don't remember her name, who wrote the Ahsoka novel, the Padme books. Why couldn't she write something for the adult fiction? Why did they get Charles Scholl? Charles Scholl should stick to young adult fiction, not adults. And I know for some of those who don't read the both Legends and Canon wouldn't know what I'm talking about, but hear me out here. Take anything from the new canon that isn't written by Charles Scholl. Take one of Timothy Zahn's books. Read one chapter, and then come back to Light of the Jedi, and you'll know the difference between someone that is capable of writing books that adults can read and enjoy to somebody that, okay, this isn't bad, but this isn't something adult that should be for adults. Because some of the words that's used in this book, I cringe at times. Do we really need to hear saving the day in a Star Wars book for adults? They could use other words in its place. Like the Jedi won't be there may not be there to save us next time. You could use that instead, and it will mean the same thing. Instead of saying saving the day. Because saving the day, who the fuck uses that word in adult fiction? I'm being real. Who the fuck does that? Charles Scholl obviously has no experience writing, adult fiction. And I don't think they should have given someone who has never written something before, especially a Star Wars novel. I don't understand why they could not have gotten Claudia Gray to write, Light of the Jedi. They could have had the exact same story and it would have been much better for it. It's just Light of the Jedi, it suffers the most because of its author. And I do not like Charles Scholl, honestly. Because if this is any indication of how he's going to write for Light of the Jedi, for future books in this series, oh God. keep him away from Star Wars. That's all I'm saying. This book isn't terrible. It's okay. I don't know. Honestly. I mean, seriously. Honestly, Light of the Jedi is okay. It's not great. It's not terrible. It's just okay. Because, honestly, the multimedia project will suffer greatly if they continue to get this guy on. Because this guy obviously is incapable of, writing stories for anything but young adults. Because if he can't write for something that's supposed to be more complex for adults, then you shouldn't get him to write. And I don't want him writing any more Star Wars, books in this era, honestly. Most of this book is held back not on the world building, not on the characters, but by Charles Scholl mediocre writing. And it's a shame because Light of the Jedi, if I had time to think about this, it could have been great. It really could have. And I know some being accused me of my standards being too high because I am a fan of Legends and I'm always going to, suck the dick of Legends. No, I'm being objective here. Okay, Alvar Salator is not the best writer when it comes to fantasy. But you know what? He wrote a great starting point in the New Jedi Order era. Vector Prime, despite him writing only one book in this era, and he managed to make a masterpiece out of one book. And I do consider the New Jedi Order, at least especially Vector Prime, one of the greatest Star Wars novels ever written. Honestly, he set up, an entire era. He set the tone, for what the era is going to be like. And Charles Scholl doesn't do the same thing as Salator did 20 years ago. And I'm not even going to compare him to the likes of Timothy Zahn, because comparing most people to Timothy Zahn is like comparing, people to fucking Tolkien. Yeah, I agree. It's just, for me, if you're going to get Charles Scholl to come back again, have him do young adult fiction. Don't have him do adult fiction. Because unlike Claudia Gray can do both. I know this. Because I've, listened to Master and Apprentice on Audible 2 years ago. It was a great book. It felt like an adult novel. Hell, Lost Stars feels like a young adult novel. Same thing with Princess Leia of Alderaan. That felt like an adult novel. Same thing with Bloodlines, which is I don't like that novel and how cringe it was still an adult novel. Instead of getting someone with no experience writing, adult fiction, they got Charles Scholl. I'm sorry. A lot of people put this guy on a pedestal because, he wrote a bunch of stupid Darth Vader comics. And in the modern Marvel era of Star Wars comics. Okay, so that means he's a good writer because he wrote some Darth Vader fan fiction. Come on, get out of here with that stuff. I'm sorry if this comes off as negative, but Light of the Jedi, when it comes to adult fiction, I hold it with higher standard than I do young adult fiction. When you have young adult fiction writers in Star Wars feeling more like an adult novel, that's a fucking problem. That is a serious problem. And I'm sorry, I don't care if you love, Light of the Jedi. I don't care. You can consider this the greatest Star Wars book to come out in the new canon. Yes, it has some positive aspects. And I've listed them in this stream. But that doesn't make it a freaking good book. It's barely decent. It really is barely decent. It should have been something more. It really should have been something more. It should not have been something, that, only, people who are desperate for something good for Star Wars to enjoy. It should have been something that was great. That should have been like a new hope, for the new canon. I do see potential in the High Republic era, but this novel on its own, it just isn't good. If you were to judge it individually, it's just not good. And it pains me to say this. I don't hate Light of the Jedi, honestly. I think it's a good book. It could have, a potentially good book written by a mediocre author. I mean, many of the problems I have with Light of the Jedi, I'm referring to mostly the writing style as my biggest issue with the book, could have been, mitigated had you simply got another author to write this book. Anybody could have written this book. It would have been better than Charles Scholl, honestly. Okay, maybe not Chuck Wendig. I don't think anybody is as bad as Chuck Wendig as a writer, but it still stands that, I don't care if people could say Charles Scholl did a great job with this. I disagree. I think those who think he did a great job have not read that much Star Wars novels, whether it's in canon or legends. I mean, seriously, pick up a Timothy Zahn book, any Timothy Zahn book, and you'll know the difference in quality. Light of the Jedi, honestly, on its own, is decent. As if we're judging it based on, Star Wars. But if we're going to be objective here, if we're compare it to all other books that exist currently in canon, it's one of the worst books in the new canon. Objectively, one of the worst books. Objectively. Due to the fact that it just doesn't, do what it should have done. The world building's great, yes. The characters are interesting, yes. But all these things that I'm talking about could have been done by a more competent writer. And Light of the Jedi could have been from being okay to being good. And I really wanted to like this book, but it's just not that great. Hopefully, A Test with Courage is better, and that's for kids. And if that book is better than this book, I'm gonna be freaking having an aneurysm. I know for sure Into the Dark by Claudia Gray is gonna be leaps and bounds better than this book, because Claudia Gray, unlike Charles Scholl, is actually an experienced novelist, and her book doesn't read like a fan fiction. And unfortunately, as much as I hate to say this book does read like a fanfic, and I know because I've read Star Wars fan fictions in the early to late 2000s. Well, yeah. Okay, here's the thing. I don't think, there's anything wrong with reading Star Wars books. If that's the only thing you're interested in, that's not a problem. Honestly, the problem is when you look at other books within the same franchise that actually have done what this book did but do it better, that's a problem. And I think blindly praising Light of the Jedi because everything else is pretty much sucked in the new canon, you're doing yourself and Star Wars a disservice. And if you ask me, you should demand better out of Disney. Now, will A Test of Courage and Into the Dark be better? Well, I can't say for Test of Courage, but Into the Dark, it's definitely going to be better than this, because Claudia Gray is one of the best writers currently in the new canon. I mean, I'm not even joking when I say that. It will be. And that's a sad thing. The sequel to this, I think, will be better. I think it will be. I strongly believe that. But Light of the Jedi, if you compare it to the likes of Vector Prime, it just doesn't compare, honestly. I'm crossing my fingers that, the next book is better than this, because I don't know. Anyway, the stream has been going on long enough. Light of the Jedi, if I have to be real, if we're judging it based on Star Wars, Because if we had a more competent writer, it would be good. Because of Charles Scholl being the author of this book, a good book is okay to mediocre at best. It pains me to say this. I like certain aspects of this novel, but it doesn't live up to its potential because of its author. And, well, next time I'll be talking about A Test of Courage, which is another book in the High Republic. Will it be better than this? Well, since I know nothing about the author, I don't know. Hope my expectations may be subverted. Then again, I think anything is bound to be better than this. Have a good day, everyone. Stay safe. May the Force be with you. And for God's sake, don't lower your damn standards because Star Wars' name is on